Episode 30, September the 5th to September the 10th, 1914. Locusts of Steel. Emotional entries from the diary of a casualty. By the Honourable Aubrey Herbert. Read by Robin Goldsmith. As I swung into the saddle, a shot came from just behind me, missing me. I rode back as fast as moonshine would go. The lull in the firing had ceased, and the Germans were all round us. One could see them in the wood, and they were shooting quite close. The man who finally got me was about 15 to 20 yards away. His bullet came into my side broken up. It was like a tremendous punch. I galloped straight on to my regiment and told the colonel. He said, "I'm sorry that you're hit. I'm going to charge." He had told me earlier that he meant to, if he got the chance. I got off and asked them to take on my horse. Then I lay down on the ground, and an RAMC man dressed me. The Red Cross men gave a loud whistle when they saw my wound, and said the bullet had gone through me. The fire was frightfully hot. The men who were helping me were crouching down, lying on the ground. While he was dressing me, a horse, his I suppose, was shot just behind. I asked them to go, as they could do me no good, and would only get killed or taken themselves. The doctor gave me some morphia, and I gave them my revolver. They put me on a stretcher, leaving another empty stretcher beside me. This was hit several times. Shots came from all directions, and the fire seemed to be lower than earlier in the day. The bullets were just above me and my stretcher. I lost consciousness for a bit. Then I heard my regiment charging. There were loud cries and little spurts of spasmodic shooting. And then everything was quiet, and a deep peace fell upon the wood. It was very dreamlike. It is really difficult to reconstruct this fight. I think every man's attention was fixed like iron on doing his own job. Otherwise, they would all have noticed more. As I lay on the stretcher, a jarring thought came to me. I had in my pocket the flat-nosed bullets which the War Office had served out to us as revolver ammunition. They're not dum-dum bullets, but would naturally not make as pleasant a wound as the sharp-nosed ones, and it occurred to me that those having them would be shot. I searched my pockets and flung mine away. I did not discover one which remained and was buried later on, but neither did the Germans. It was first hearing German voices close by that jogged my memory about these bullets, and the Germans were so close that I felt some difficulty in throwing the bullets away. The same idea must have occurred to others, for later I heard the Germans speaking very angrily about the flat bullets they'd picked up in the wood, and saying how they would deal with anyone in whose possession they were found. The glades became resonant with loud, raucous German commands and occasional cries from wounded men. After about an hour and a half, I suppose, a German with a red beard, with the sun shining on his helmet and bayonet, came up looking like an angel of death. He walked around from behind and put his serrated bayonet on the empty stretcher beside me, so close that it all but touched me. The stretcher broke, and his bayonet poked me. I inquired in broken but polite German what he proposed to do next. After reading the English papers and seeing the way he was handling his bayonet, it seemed to me there was going to be another atrocity. He was extraordinarily kind and polite. He put something under my head, offered me wine, water, and cigarettes. He said, "Wir sind Kameraden." Another soldier came up and said, "Why didn't you stay in England, you who made war upon the Boers?" I said, "We obeyed orders, just as you do. As for the Boers, they were our enemies and are now our friends. And it's not your business to insult wounded men." My first friend then cursed him heartily, and he moved on. The Germans passed in crowds. They seemed like steel locusts. Every now and then I would hear, "Here is an officer who talks German," and the crowd would swerve in like a steel eddy. Then, "Schnell, Kinder," and they would be off. They gave a tremendous impression of lightness and iron. After some hours, when my wound was beginning to hurt, some carriers came up to take me to a collecting place for the wounded. These men were rather rough. They dropped me in my stretcher once, but were cursed by an officer. They then carried me some distance and took me off the stretcher, leaving me on the ground. The Germans continued to pass in an uninterrupted stream. One motorcyclist, but with a bayonet in his hand, was very unpleasant. He said, "I'd like to put this in your throat and turn it round and round," waving it down to my nose. That sort of thing happened more than once or twice. But there were always more friends than enemies. Though as night fell, the chance of being left without friends increased. As it grew dark, I got rather cold. One of the Germans saw this, covered me with his coat and said, "Wait a moment, I'll bring you something else." He went off and, I suppose, stripped a dead Englishman and a dead German. The German's jersey, which he gave me, had no holes in it. The Englishman's coat had 2 bayonet cuts. The wounded began to cry dreadfully in the darkness. I found myself beside Robin, a fellow officer, who was very badly wounded in the leg. The Germans gave me water when I asked for it, but every time I drank, it made me sick. At, I suppose, 9:30 or 10 o'clock, they took us off in an ambulance and carried us to a house that had been turned into a hospital. I was left outside talking to a Dane who was very anti-German, though he was serving with them as a Red Cross man. He cursed them loudly in German. He said it was monstrous that I hadn't been attended to, and that the Germans had had a defeat and would be beaten. I said, "Yes, it's all true, but please stop talking, because they'll hear you and punish me." Just before 12 o'clock, they carried me into the hospital, onto the operating table, and dressed my wound quickly. Then I was helped out to an outhouse and lay beside Robin. It was full of English and German wounded. They gave us 1 drink of water, and then shut and locked the door and left us for the night. One man cried and cried for water until he died. It was a horrible night. The straw was covered with blood, and there was never a moment when men were not groaning and calling for help. In the morning, the man next to Robin went off his head and became animal with pain. I got the Germans to do what was possible for him. I asked the Germans to let me out, and they helped me outside into a chair, and I talked to an officer called Brandt. He sent a telegram to the German authorities to say that Robin and I were lightly wounded, and asking them to let our families know. He would not let me pay. I would have liked to have done it for everyone, but that wasn't possible. They took us away in an ambulance at about 11 o'clock. It was a beautiful September day, very hot indeed. The heat in the covered ambulance was suffocating. And Robin must have suffered horribly. He asked me the German for quick, and when I told him, urged the Germans on. There were great jolts, and at Vivier I found Shields, who said to me, "Hello, you wounded, and you a volunteer too?" As if a volunteer ought to be immune from wounds. We were carried upstairs and told that Valentine and Buddy, fellow officers, whom I'd last met under the cedars, were in the same hospital. Valentine had the point of his elbow shot away just after I'd left him. He raised his hand to brush a wasp off his neck, and only remembered pitching forward when a bullet struck his elbow. He woke up in a pool of blood. A German came and took the flask of brandy that I'd given him after my visit to Soissons. He gave Valentine a drink, and then, when Valentine had said he did not want any more, swigged the whole of the rest off. It was enough to make 2 men drunk, solidly, for hours. Later, 5 Germans came up to Valentine and ragged him. One of them kicked him, but an officer arrived, took all their names, promised Valentine they should be punished, and attached an orderly to him for the night. Buddy was badly wounded in the back and arm. He found his servant in the church of Vivier. Then we all met at the house in Vivier. The doctors gave Robin and me a strong dose of morphia. That afternoon a German doctor, whose name was Hilsparg, came in and woke me. He gave me a gold watch with a crest on it, and a silver watch, and a purse of gold, 8 pounds in it. He said that a colonel to whom the watch belonged had been buried close by in the village of Harriman, and asked me if I could say who he was. We heard that the colonel had been killed, and I imagine it must have been him, but we could not tell, as apparently every single man of the 70-odd who charged with him had been killed. The doctor left this watch with me. Our experiences on the field were all the same. We were all well treated, though occasionally we were insulted. In hospital, an old Oberstadt was in command of the doctors. He was very good to us. The English doctors were W, in command, S, next, Rankin and Shields. They were all good doctors. W, Rankin and Shields were excellent fellows. Rankin, who has been killed since, himself wounded, was dressing the wounded on the field and was recommended for the VC. Shields has been killed in the same way, and I believe would have been recommended, but that his CO was also killed. They were the best sort of man you can find. After a couple of days, I moved into Buddy and Valentine's room. A little way down the street there was the chateau, full of wounded Germans. Our men were carried there to be operated upon. W and the other doctors who went to help discovered there were 311 wounded Germans, as against 92 of our own, so we didn't do badly. Every morning the German sentries used to come in and talk to us. My German and Buddy's was very weak, but we managed to get along all right. Downstairs, those who were lightly wounded sat outside in the chairs they took from the house, in the sunny garden. It was a fairly luxurious house, with paper marked F.H. I thought it was a girls' school, for the only books we could find were the Berger de Valence and Jules Verne. My side was painful the first few days. Then they cut me open and took out the bullet, which was all in bits. It was rather hard lines on the others to perform an operation in the room, but I felt much better after it. The food difficulty was rather acute. There was very little food, and what there was badly cooked. We lived principally on things that S called chupati, thick, unleavened biscuits. The men began to give trouble. There was nobody in command of them. There was an ex-comedian who was particularly tiresome. We had to ask the Germans to punish one man for us. About the fourth day, one of the orderlies escaped, drummer McCoy. He passed for 4 days through the German lines, and on one occasion watched a whole army corps go by from the boughs of a tree. Then he found the French, who passed him on to the English, where he went to the staff and told them of us. That is how we were picked up so quickly on the 11th. Here is a copy of my diary for September the 9th. The people are beginning to return, but not the priest who is with the army. We want him for the regiment. Up to this time, only 6 of the wounded have died. The Germans tell us every kind of story. The United States are declaring war on Japan, Italy on France, Denmark on England, etc., etc. Also that Paris has been given 12 hours to accept or reject the German terms, and if the French government is obdurate, the town will be bombarded. We are told that we are to be taken as prisoners to Magdeburg. It is a week since I've had a cigarette. Thursday, September the 10th. We are all very anxious to get news home, but there is no chance. Last night, S. Herbert died. I had a testament, and Valentine and I found verses which W. read over his grave. Valentine has bad pain. 3 bones broken in his arm, and the point of his elbow gone. Buddy is better, but hit cruel hard. Robin has a bad wound, and is very restless. They don't like giving us morphia. Luckily, I have got my own medicine chest, which is a good thing for all of us, as I can give the others sleeping draughts. Last night a French cavalry patrol came within 2 miles of us. Early this morning there was rifle fire close by. It sounded in the wood that we suppose is Harriman. We think the Germans may evacuate this place any time. The bandages have given out, stores are not coming in. There's a big aeroplane depot quite close by, and the whole air is full of aeroplanes. It looks and feels as if there may be a big battle round here soon. They've shot an old man wandering about the aerodrome, but he was asking for it. 9 a.m. The aeroplanes are being shifted from the depot. Last night we heard that arms were issued to all the wounded Germans in hospital who could carry them. This morning the Germans are digging trenches hard. There are red crosses everywhere. The doctors want us to go down to the cellars if we're shelled. The French women in the village say the French are coming. Firing is increasing. 9:15 a.m. The German hospital across the way is ordered to be ready to move at once. 10:25 a.m. An order has come for all prisoners to parade at the church at 12 o'clock. The German lightly wounded are being sent on. We are very anxious as to whether they mean to take us too. More of our wounded who have died are being buried. 11:10 a.m. A German doctor has come. He said, "They're going and taking all of our, i.e. British, prisoners, 18 of our lightly wounded, and leaving 25 of their badly wounded." French wounded are now coming in, We have no more bandages at all. The German sentry with whom I had talked has just come in. I asked him some days ago to buy some handkerchiefs. He said, "I've not been able to buy you any handkerchiefs or to get the cigarettes you wanted, but here is one of my own handkerchiefs which I've washed. We've got to go." 8 p.m. The last order is that the previous orders are countermanded, and the Germans are to stay on 10 days. Friday, September the 11th. Our English prisoners were marched off this morning. We're full of speculation as to what has really happened. Valentine, Buddy, and I are well. 10:10 a.m. There are machine guns about 4 miles away. 10:30 a.m. There is heavy rifle fire within a mile. It's very trying lying here in bed. We have nothing to read except the Rajah's Heir, which V sent to me, and which has become known as the Treasure House of Fun. It's a sort of mixture of hymns ancient and modern and the Fairchild family. 2 p.m. There is a Maxim within a few hundred yards of the house. Rifle volleys outside in the garden. A rising wind and rain threatening. 3 p.m. Heavy rain. The French are visible, advancing. 3:10 p.m. The French are here. They came in fine style like conquerors. One man first, riding, his hand on his hip. The German sentries, who had been posted to protect us wounded, walked down and surrendered their bayonets. The German doctors came to us for help. I offered to go, but W went. The French infantry and cavalry came streaming through. Our wounded went out into the pouring rain to cheer them. They got water from our men, whose hands they kissed. The German guns are on the skyline. The Germans are in full retreat and said to be cut off by the English. 5 p.m. A heavy bombardment of the German guns began from here. I've come upstairs to a long, low garret with skylights in order to leave Valentine and Buddy more room. Through the skylight one can see every flash of the French and German guns. The doctors all came up here to watch with their field glasses through my skylights. Saturday, September the 12th. Yesterday, when W went down, he found the German doctors receiving cavalier treatment from the French. He explained to the French that they'd treated us with the greatest kindness. After that, the French treated with courtesy the old Oberstadt. Shields carved a great wooden tombstone for the 13 men who had died up to date. It's a month today since I left England. This afternoon, Colonel Thompson, English staff officer attached to General Manoury, who had been attached to the Serbian army through the last war, came in. McCoy, who had escaped, had found him and told him about us at Viviers. He said he would take me into Villa Cotterêts after he'd done some other business. We talked a lot about the Balkans, but I finally went back and lay down in my garret and shall not get up again today. Sunday, September the 13th. I went off with Thompson this morning. We passed through the wood where we had had the fight, and a long grave of 120 men was shown to me by McCoy.
shouting out these pathetic words. Goodbye, goodbye, when the tear may begin from your eye. Oh, it's hard to part, I know. I'll be tickled to death, I go.